bombs are loud, the missile strikes pierce through the air. But beyond the noise of the war, a silent catastrophe is unfolding. I'm Shreya Upadhyaya, and today I'm taking you beyond the battlefield, beyond the explosions, beyond the headlines, into a quieter, more enduring crisis. A far more invisible war is unraveling. We may not see it, we may not even hear it. I'm talking about the environmental cost of the Iran war. Not just human lives. This war is now taking away our environment as well. Let me tell you about the different types of pollution we are all living in due to the Iran war. In just the first 2 weeks of fighting, the war had already generated an estimated 5 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions. To put that into perspective, that's more than what over 80 low-emitting countries produce in an entire year. And these emissions are not coming from a single source. They are the combined result of relentless airstrikes, burning oil facilities, collapsing infrastructure, and continuous military operations across air and sea. When the Tehran oil depot was hit, it triggered massive fires, sending thick plumes of black smoke into the atmosphere. These very plumes were not just smoke. They carried toxic chemicals, heavy metals, and fine particulate matter, substances which can travel across borders and linger in ecosystem for years. In some areas, residents reported black rainfall which is mixed with soot and chemical residue falling back to earth after the explosions. The destruction of roughly 20,000 buildings has released what scientists call embedded carbon, the emissions tied up in cement, steel, and construction materials. In the short term, exposure to polluted air is already increasing cases of respiratory distress, especially among children and the elderly. But the long-term risks are even more alarming. Doctors and environmental experts warn of rising rates of cancer, chronic respiratory disease, and neurological disorders. A survey says that if the world's militaries were a country, they would have the fourth biggest carbon footprint in the world, accounting for about 5.5% of global emissions. But the damage doesn't stop in the air. The second kind of pollution is beneath the surface. Soil and water systems are being poisoned. Oil spills, chemical leaks, and debris from the destroyed infrastructure are seeping into our rivers, our farmlands, and coastal waters. And this raises serious concerns of agriculture and food security. Experts warn that crops grown in contaminated soil could carry toxins into the food chain. Fisheries are at a risk as well. Marine ecosystems absorb pollutants released into the sea, and that obviously impacts marine life. Experts say the Strait of Hormuz is a ticking bomb as well. The Gulf water bodies are home to coral habitats, which support one of the world's largest dugong populations and the endangered Indian Ocean humpback dolphins as well. Now, the volume of oil in the ships that are stuck here is a huge risk. If there is an oil spill, marine scientists say the geography of the region will not allow absorption of a major spill there. Sunken ships can become long-term sources of pollution as well if fuel and other hazardous materials leak into the surrounding waters. The Iranian frigate, which was torpedoed by the US, is now leaking a kilometers-long oil slick off Sri Lanka. This brings me to our third problem, water security. In parts of the Gulf region, desalination plants, which are critical for producing drinking water, have been damaged or disrupted. And without them, millions could face shortages of safe water. And even where water is available, contamination from industrial chemicals may render it unsafe for consumption. Now remember, if you think it's happening far away and will not affect you, you're wrong. Because what happens in West Asia doesn't stay in West Asia, whether politically or environmentally. The emissions released during this conflict are accelerating global warming at a time when the world is already struggling to meet climate targets. And this is only the beginning. leaders around the world have been making efforts to take climate action in their respective countries, reduce carbon emissions, cut down on fossil fuels, don't let the average global temperature rise. All for what? For the same leaders to start a war, not just against each other, but also against our environment. Because rebuilding what has been destroyed will require vast amounts of energy and resources, which means the carbon footprint of this war will continue to grow long after the fighting stops, if it does. Now, there's also a dangerous paradox at play. In the short term, the conflict is disrupting global energy supplies, particularly through the Strait of Hormuz, which carries nearly 20% of the world's oil. So as a result, countries are now turning back to coal and other high-emission fuels to stabilize their energy needs. In the long term, this very crisis underscores the urgent need to transition to cleaner, more stable energy systems. There's also the nuclear fear. Some strikes have occurred near sensitive facilities, raising fears of potential radiation risks if nuclear sites were to be compromised. While monitoring the true scale of the environmental damage remains difficult at the moment due to limited access, history tells us that environmental scars of war do not fade quickly. From the oil fires of Kuwait to industrial destruction in past conflicts, ecosystems often take decades to recover, if at all they recover. And in many cases, the full impact is only understood years later. So what we are witnessing is not just a regional crisis, it is a global one, because air doesn't need a passport. Carbon emissions do not carry a national flag, and pollution knows no borders. The Iran conflict is a reminder that modern warfare is no longer confined to battlefields. It extends into our climate systems, our food supplies, and our collective future. So here's the big question. Who should be held responsible for the cost of war that cannot be rebuilt, reversed, or undone? This is not just a war story, it is a public health emergency.